Welcome to the second bonus episode of Why Not Both? In effort to continue a running theme of wishing I were still in Iceland, I decided that it would be a good idea to publish another interview from last time I was in Iceland. I hope that you enjoy it. So I'm here with Árni Ingólffson. Thank you so much for joining us on Why Not Both?
My pleasure.
So my first question is often, what do you do? And the follow-up to that is there a better question I could be asking?
What do I do? I'm a musicologist. I do research, I teach, I give lectures, and I'm also the artistic advisor for the Iceland Symphony Orchestra, which is Iceland's leading orchestra, national orchestra.
Mm-hmm. And you also brought a lovely stack of books.
Yes, I write books every once in a while. That's part of what I do as a musicologist, a music historian.
Mm-hmm.
I write a lot about Icelandic music, both new and old. And actually, I have two books that just came out last week. One in Iceland in Icelandic, which is about medieval and sort of music manuscripts written in Iceland from around 1100 to 1800. Basically sort of a survey of Icelandic music history through the manuscripts that have survived containing music.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other book is called Jón Leifs and the Musical Invention of Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a biography of Iceland's first great classical 20th century composer. The first nationalist, you could say, in music. The first, sort of like the Icelandic Bartók. First composer who went into the countryside, collected folk songs from the people, and then used them to create symphonic masterworks.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Capturing the essence of Iceland, also the Icelandic nature. Wrote, music that's titled, Geysir and Hekla, sort of descriptions of volcanoes, or capturing the natural forces of Iceland through music.
Wow. And you're clearly passionate about this topic. I can see from the way that you're engaged in it.
He's a fantastically interesting subject because I guess like many interesting subjects, he's problematic.
I noticed you used the word nationalist, which
right.
in modern parlance is sometimes a very...
Well, nationalistic, I guess, is maybe the better word because it has sort of less overtones of... But at the time... classical music was considered one of the ways in which a nation could assert its nationhood in a way. And he grows up at a time when Iceland is asserting its independence from Denmark. We were a colony of Denmark until 1918. And one of the questions that were sort of very actual in Iceland in the first decades of the 20th century when, we were gaining and had gained independence is, okay, what do we do now? How do we show the world that we are actually a nation among nations? So, composers start writing symphonic music. We get a symphony orchestra, a national theater, all these institutions that people felt went along with being an independent country.
I see.
So he's very much sort of involved in that, the spirit of that sort of asserting one's nationhood in a way through the arts.
That's fascinating that you wrote about him, and it kind of like pinged in my brain, like, how does that dovetail with what you do as an artistic advisor? Like, do you feel like that knowledge informs what you do in the other half of your life? Oh,
absolutely. The work that I do with the Iceland Symphony basically is sort of laying down the programs, the conductors, the soloists, sort of deciding what the orchestra plays, having a broad overview of the repertory, both in terms of just in general symphonic music of all periods and styles, but also specifically of Icelandic music,
right?
Which is, we're actually sort of required by law, because we're a state-funded orchestra. We're required by law to sort of support Icelandic composers, present Icelandic music. So knowledge of that repertoire is crucial to what I do.
Oh, wow. That makes total sense. And I'm curious now, like, why is he controversial?
Well, he was... Let's say he had a volcanic temper, for one thing. He was quite a personality.
I see.
That was one thing. He wrote dissonant modern sounding music when Iceland had, no real musical history, no tradition. People just weren't ready for that kind of music. I mean, it feels like Iceland sort of had to go through the Romantic period of music sort of 100 years
after
later,
the Romantic period.
Just because we needed that before we could become modernists in a way.
I see.
And so he was perceived at the time to be here very much ahead of his time.
I see.
Not so much in other countries because they had obviously moved further ahead.
Right.
And then there was also the question, I mean, he sort of, I'm not sure if the right phrase would be to say that he was politically naive or politically opportunistic. He had a very interesting so he studied as a kid in Iceland, and then he went to Germany to continue his studies in the 1910s, 20s. Got married to a pianist who he met at school, who it turned out, he didn't know about this at the time, but turned out later was Jewish, was a full Jew, who had converted to Christianity, but was like fully, in terms of bloodline, which is what the Nazis were interested in, was fully Jewish.
Yes.
However, they stayed on in Germany after the Nazis came to power.
Wow, that sounds dangerous for both involved.
Exactly, but some Germans actually didn't realize, the danger. She apparently didn't want to move any more than he did. And for a while, the Nazis were kind of intrigued by the idea of an Icelandic composer who wrote symphonic scores based on folk music. I mean, that to them sounded...
Wow, so to them it was like a curiosity.
Yeah, well, it sounded very sort of pure and Aryan and sort of possibly their
like
ideal of
kind of
sort of purified music that was free from all these influences of, the southern whatever.
Wow.
But then it turns out they really didn't like his music when they heard it. It sounded better on paper. Because it was
like the clashing of ideologies with the actual music
because
itself.
it was too dissonant, and then they found out that his wife was Jewish, and that was sort of the end of everything.
Oh my goodness!
But there's a really fascinating reception history there as to his career in Germany.
Wow!
And that whole sort of tug of war between him and his family and the authorities.
Oh my goodness!
Who sort of like him at the start but hate him at the end.
Wow. Yeah, because I was like, when you were describing when he went there to study, I was like, oh, that would have been the height of the time to study in Germany.
Right, yes, exactly.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And then he was also the guy who brought the symphonic music to Iceland for the first time.
Wow.
Living in Germany in 1926, he convinced one of the top German orchestras to come to Iceland. I mean, he was passionate about this because he felt like in order for there to be musical progress in Iceland, we need to actually hear what a symphony orchestra sounds like.
Right.
We can't become passionate about this if we've never heard the thing.
Well, in a way, it's almost the same abstraction as like them being passionate about the idea of it, but not the thing.
Sure.
And
like, how can you imagine a symphony orchestra if you've never heard it?
Right.
So he convinced one of the top German orchestras to travel to Iceland on their summer holiday without any pay.
Wow.
To play 14 concerts in 15 days.
He must have been rather charismatic.
When he wanted to, I think he could be charismatic and passionate, and he could also be incredibly annoying.
Got it.
It's sort of the picture that I get.
And it sounds like kind of researching what you do would definitely inform what you do here. Like, what do you find that you most want to bring when you're like bringing things to Harpa, for instance? Like, what do you want to bring to Harpa?
First of all, I think most importantly, things that are good. I think sort of quality, it doesn't really, I mean, the Iceland Symphony does a lot of different things. And that's sort of, I think that's maybe one of our characteristics if you compare us to, because bigger cities sometimes have many orchestras, or at least many orchestras in the region that can specialize a little bit more.
Right.
We're the only symphony orchestra in Iceland.
You're the only one.
So we need to cover a whole lot of different stuff. So, we do traditional symphonic concerts. We do a lot of contemporary music, new music, both Icelandic but also foreign contemporary, film scores. We collaborate with pop singers. I mean, we've done concerts with Björk and all kinds of, popular musicians.
Yeah.
And so really, no matter what we do, I feel like my main job is to make sure that we're doing it at the top level possible. That we get, the best conductors, the best soloists, the best programs that we could possibly offer. And it's gone amazingly well, I think I have to say. I mean, Harpa is now about to become 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sort of changed everything in terms of the musical life of Reykjavik, especially for the orchestra to have a first-class concert hall.
I was going to say to have its home and to have it be such a beautiful home.
And, it's a magnet for foreign musicians who want to come here because they think this is one of the best halls in the world.
Right.
And so being able to sort of guarantee music making at that high level, that's really a passion of mine. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to accomplish that, I think.
How would you describe the role to someone who is interested in becoming an artistic advisor? Like, what did you do to get to this place? What would you suggest someone else do?
I applied for a job.
Great first step.
Well, yeah, the orchestra was looking for someone. Actually, they had one person who was doing two things. One was sort of looking after the artistic side, and the other sort of the more practical side of running the concerts in a way, making sure, that hotel rooms were booked and contracts were signed and all those things. And when she retired, they split the job into two positions, and I applied for one of them, which was more the artistic one. And so my job is basically to come up with ideas, come up with programs, be in touch with, sort of have a feel for the music scene in a way, to know what conductors are good and bad, who's up and coming, to sort of, have a sense of that all, and then to be in touch with artist managers and find, I'm sort of managing the calendar in a way.
I see.
To, offer, is this conductor free this week to do this, etc.
Got it. So it seems like creative, but also logistical and...
Exactly, creative and logistical.
How do you feel like, do you have to kind of have your finger on the pulse of what people are looking for as an audience as well? Yeah,
absolutely. I also work together with, there's a sort of program committee in the orchestra, which is made up of myself, a team from the office, including the marketing people, which is very important to have their input as we put together the program. What do they think will sell?
Right.
How do we, to have an idea of how we market a concert as we are conceiving it. Is very important.
I see.
Instead of coming up with the idea and then going to the marketing department and say, can you possibly sell this?
It sounds almost like you were describing of, you can hear the idea of something, but then when you hear the thing itself.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
You don't want that layer of abstraction between the two.
Right. And then we also have musicians actually from the orchestra as part of the program committee. So they also bring their input. So my role is also in a way to sort of mediate between all the different ideas and sort of negotiate and until we reach a solution that everyone is happy with, the orchestra, the office, the marketing department, and the conductors and the soloists, because often, they will have their own suggestions.
You have to be very diplomatic.
Right, sure. That, they want to do this symphony, or a violinist will say, I really want to come to Iceland, but this season I'm only playing 3 violin concertos. And we need to choose one of those. And
then you got one of these options. That's it.
And then we need to make sure that no one is playing the same concerto. We don't have the same concerto twice, or the same symphony, or that we're not doing too much Schumann, or not too much Mahler, or or that there's no Mozart in an entire season. There are all
Can't have a season without Mozart.
Right, exactly. But there are all these logistical things that we need to take care of.
Right. How do you balance that with then, like, the research side? Because when you went into musicology, did you anticipate that then you'd be working as an artistic advisor? Did you think you'd be more of an academic?
Yes. Well, yes. I thought I would be more of an academic. I was also, I trained as a pianist, actually, originally, in the States. I moved to the States when I was 19 for
my goodness.
College and then graduate school in the States.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And so I trained first as a pianist at the Oberlin Conservatory in Ohio.
Oh my goodness, I visited Oberlin. I was debating going there.
It's a great place.
That's wonderful.
And then I went to graduate school at Harvard and went into musicology there. So I always thought my double life, as I imagined it then, would be an academic / performer. And then sort of, I still perform sometimes, but it's turned out to be more sort of academic / artistic administrator.
How did that changeover happen?
pretty much when I got this job.
Yeah.
It was sort of, I mean, I just thought it was too exciting not to do it. Because, I mean, being in charge of the artistic side of an orchestra of this quality, but also of this sort of importance in this community. I mean, the Iceland Symphony is really central to musical life in Iceland. You really have sort of the chance to shape almost an entire musical culture through what this orchestra presents. And that's a fantastic challenge. I mean, I couldn't pass on that.
I was gonna say that's a lot of responsibility.
It is, yeah. It's fantastic, and I'm really lucky that my colleagues here at the office are also very understanding of the fact that I also have this sort of other life as a scholar.
Yeah.
And they sort of they allow me the flexibility to sort of go in and out as needed, and that, you know, when I get, you know, the final proof for my book, I may not be in the office much that day.
That's what I was wondering, is because writing a book it's arduous, because most people are balancing teaching and writing. And so that's different, because then you're like, oh, well, I might have office hours, but then I can dip out. Whereas this sounds like a really like full-time and very engaging position.
It requires a lot of flexibility on everyone's part, but mostly I would say my colleagues' part. and they're lovely. So I can't praise them enough.
Aww. It's very interesting speaking to you about that, about it being the flexibility of colleagues, because a lot of the people that I've interviewed prior have been American.
Right.
And there's such a different culture there in regards to work.
Yes.
Because it sounds like with you, it's more that your work is very accommodating of the fact that you have this other passion that actually is related to your studies.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, a lot of people end up going into a second thing because of like economic necessity.
Right.
Where it sounds like yours was much more based upon like choice and passion.
Yeah. But I think also, I mean, I'm fortunate that my colleagues realize that the research I'm doing is also beneficial in a way to the Icelandic musical culture that the symphony is here to serve and nurture. Right? That, you know, I'm doing research on Icelandic music history. My knowledge of that will inform my capability to do my job well for the orchestra. The fact that our audiences maybe have read my books and are knowledgeable about music and sort of, you know, have a deeper understanding of it through reading about it, will make them a better informed audience, which means they'll maybe come to concerts more often or enjoy them more, or sort of have a deeper understanding of things.
Yes.
So it all sort of feeds into one another in a way that's difficult to describe, but is definitely there somehow.
Well, and it's less tangible than if someone says, oh, you will do X, it will produce Y, and someone will pay for X or Y.
Exactly.
Whereas it's like, you will do X, it will make Y, then Z will happen. Right. We might loop back around to A, and then, but it seems more of like an ecosystem as opposed to a chain of command.
Exactly.
And I'd imagine, especially the way that you describe that composer's music, I'm looking at the book now, especially if it is more dissonant and modern. I don't know if this is true of Icelandic audiences, but I found that with American audiences, it does help to know either the theory or the history behind such music, as it often doesn't evoke the same kind of, as we were talking about, like the Romantic era, where it might evoke emotions in a quite naturalistic way. Whereas if someone actually reads your book, they might have a better understanding of, oh, this is what I'm coming in to hear.
Exactly. Yeah. That's absolutely true.
I remember the first time I heard Schoenberg, I was like, oh, wow, it sounds like a cat walking on a keyboard. Then I actually studied the 12-tone scale, and I was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting.
Exactly.
It'd be quite fortuitous if a cat made this.
No, I mean, definitely, the more you know, the more you appreciate what you hear.
Yes.
And that's also part of my job, in a way, is I write often program notes for the concerts and give pre-concert talks.
I see.
And so I have a really good dialogue with our audience. I mean, you know, they read my writings regularly. They see me. They come to my lectures.
That's actually what I was wondering. Is like, it sounds like you really have a connection with them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which is wonderful, and it also gives me the opportunity to listen to them and what their thoughts are, what they feel we should be doing more of, less of, etc.
Right.
So I think it's probably not many people in my kind of position with orchestras have that kind of a relationship, because they're more sort of office-based, and then they will outsource the program notes and the pre-concert talks. Exactly. But I think it actually is incredibly beneficial to have that kind of a contact with your audience.
Do you think that it would be possible at a larger scale? Like, because you said, obviously, this is like the only symphony orchestra in Iceland, and it is like a smaller community. Do you think that it's possible to do that in bigger communities?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's just a question of orchestras maybe being more flexible with their employees, and I mean, not all artistic administrators will be trained musicologists, right. But some of them are, and obviously most of them are incredibly knowledgeable about music and music history and the repertory. So I'm sure that many of them have the skills to do these kinds of things that I do as well, and I think it would definitely be beneficial.
Yeah, because it sounds like especially both of the fields that you're talking about sometimes have, I guess, the reputation of being removed, like either being an advisor or being an academic.
Right.
They both kind of have the implication of you're distanced from your audience, or you're kind of off doing something by yourself, and and then you kind of come back with the treasures you found and share them with others. Whereas it sounds like you actually have more of a dialogue back and forth.
Exactly. I think that's maybe also just part of the way Icelandic society works in a way. I mean, it's so easy to connect to people or groups of people, and I mean we're only 350,000 people. I mean, we're all doing 3 or 4 different things because society just needs
facilitates that
us to function that way.
Right.
And so I mean, I think it's great. I feel very fortunate to be in the position I'm in.
That's wonderful. Did you find, when you were in America, how did you find the culture to be when you were studying there? Like, what led you to then come back here? Like, what was kind of the journey there?
Well, I mean, the reason that I went to the States in the first place was, well, I had some family there. My aunt and uncle lived in New York, but I went to a summer course, actually, in Interlochen in Michigan. For 2 summers, and I sort of got intrigued, and they had these sort of college fairs, and I came home with a suitcase full of brochures from all kinds of colleges, and I was sort of thinking, well, maybe I want to do something along those lines, and I realized that Oberlin had a program where you could major both in performance and music history, and I sort of knew already as a teenager that I didn't just want to become a pianist, and I always had that sort of eagerness to learn more about music in its historical, theoretical sense.
Yeah.
So I did my studies in the States, and then sort of around the time I was finishing my PhD, the Iceland University of the Arts opened a music department, which there hadn't been a music department at the university level in Iceland.
Oh, so that facilitated maybe why I got it.
They basically, even before I finished my degree, they offered me a job to come back. So I did. And I taught there for 4 or 5 years before I moved to the symphony. I've maintained a good contact with the university, so I'm a visiting professor there now, so every once in a while I'll go back and teach a course if I have the time, especially on Icelandic music history. I maintain that contact, but obviously I'm not, with all the other things I'm doing, I'm not able to teach very much.
You'd never sleep.
But it's also very nice to go back into that environment once in a while, because I mean, teaching is it's also important for an academic to also keep in shape in a way. I mean, it's sort of like a muscle that you don't want to lose, to sort of be in touch with students and interact on that kind of level. And
because it sounds like you get some of that didactic stuff out with your audience, but it is much different when it's university students that are taking a course for a particular reason.
That's a much deeper level, and in a way, obviously, a much more satisfying level for a teacher than to be doing the sort of more informal things that a symphony orchestra audience will involve.
Do you think you ever would go back more to teaching?
Possibly. Yeah. You never know. But for now, I'm very happy the way I have things set up.
Do you ever miss performing at all?
Not really, because I do it every once in a while enough so that I feel like I haven't quite let go of it.
Got it.
I try to play a bit every day. And so, yeah, I feel like that's not quite something that I've completely left behind in my past.
Got it.
Yeah.
There's some people that I've talked to that I'm more of a studio rat myself. Like, I love composing and arranging, and then when I have to perform, I'm like, people?
Right.
But I know a lot of musicians who their big thing is performing, that if you took performing away from them...
Yeah. I was never quite that person, but I will say sort of I found that performing got easier the more I did of it.
Got it.
And sort of I was more nervous in my early years as a student, and then, with 5, 6, 7 years of experience of just doing it, it got a lot less scary and a lot more enjoyable.
Well, that's the whole thing, is your body kind of adjusts to scary things, where after a while it can't maintain that level of scared.
Yeah.
After a while you just sort of burn out on being scared. Your body's like, well, I guess this hasn't killed me yet. So
exactly. You sort of realize, after going through some concerts, obviously, concerts are, some will go better than others, and that's just the way things are. But you realize at the end, or at some point you realize, it can't go terribly wrong. It can only go so wrong.
There's only so poorly it can go.
Right. And so, and it's never that bad. It's never as bad as you fear. So.
No.
But I will say I always found that playing chamber music or sort of interacting with other people on stage, I found a lot more satisfying than being there all by myself.
Yeah.
So I've tried to keep that up. I don't really do solo recitals anymore, but I do really enjoy playing chamber music with friends.
Oh, where do you play around town?
Sometimes here in Harpa, actually, and sort of smaller museum-ish venues in Reykjavik. Yeah.
Do you ever go up to? I was listening to another interview with someone that said that there's a whole new music scene really in Akureyri.
Yes.
Is that how you say it?
Akureyri.
I completely massacred it.
It's all right.
I was kind of adjacent to how that's pronounced. How would you describe the music scene up there? I heard that they were doing a lot of film composition and whatnot.
Yes, exactly. Well, they have sort of the other symphonic orchestra in Iceland, but it's sort of it's part-time. It's much smaller. It also relies on a lot of people actually from the Iceland Symphony. But they've sort of they've branded themselves in a very clever way, because obviously it wouldn't really be smart for them to sort of go into direct competition with the Iceland Symphony. Whereas they clearly they don't have the funds, they don't have the resources for that kind of an operation.
They also seem quite remote from how it looked. Yeah.
It's about, it takes maybe about 40 to 50 minutes to fly there.
Okay.
But they've sort of branded themselves as a film music orchestra, and television music and scores, and they do quite a lot of work there, which is great.
That's cool.
It creates a lot of work for Icelandic musicians, some from the orchestra, but also some that aren't part of the orchestra and have a good sort of side career playing film music in northern Iceland, which is fantastic.
I was gonna say it looked quite beautiful, and I could imagine working there, and everything looks rather epic.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say is kind of the best thing that you've gained from your academic work? What do you think is the most fulfilling thing that you've done so far in that arena?
You mean in terms of a general viewpoint or actual concrete work that I've done?
Well, I know that you're quite proud of the books, and so we've talked about that, but kind of what, I guess more abstractly, what do you feel is most fulfilling that you've been studying?
Well, I guess anytime that I make some kind of, I don't know, there are so many discoveries that you make where you connect dots and all that you didn't realize were connected, and all of a sudden, some area that had been problematic sort of opens up for you.
Comes into focus.
Yeah. And that's happened a lot with all kinds of different research that I've done. And so sort of, you know, having a problem that you're actually able to solve is just incredibly fulfilling as a scholar. And yeah, that's I guess that's sort of what keeps me going. And just sort of understanding more, discovering things, writing about things that no one's written about before is very exciting. We don't have, I mean, musicology doesn't have a long tradition in Iceland. We haven't had sort of, in the 20th century, we didn't have
like you mentioned that they didn't even have the music department.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So we actually have quite a bit of catching up to do in terms of just dealing with researching, chronicling our own history in a way. And it's great to be in an environment because, I mean, you know, in so many other countries it feels like the market, and I don't mean that just in a sort of, you know, market economy way, but the market is sort of saturated. The basic research has been done.
Right.
You know, what else are you going to write about Bach? You know, that hasn't already, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas here, I mean, the field is sort of completely open.
Yeah.
There's so much basic research that still needs to be done. So I feel like, I mean, I'm hoping that the University of the Arts will actually sort of maybe become a bit more serious with their sort of a musicology program. If they could build up something whereby we could train younger students to become musicologists, to just sort of help us deal with this history that is quite interesting and needs to be written.
I was wondering about that, if whether it's scholars that are already in Iceland or international scholars would want to come and chronicle and study. And
I think both, and I think especially the sort of the youngest, well, the younger generation of Icelandic composers now, like Anna Thorvaldsdóttir and Daniel Bjarnason, of the sort of classical composers, are, I mean, they're gaining a lot of interest internationally.
Yes.
Also from scholars who want to research their music and write about it sort of academically. Which is great, but it would be great if we had Icelanders as well who were working on
who are interested. Yeah, because I do find people perceive Icelandic music as being very particular, but also it's very well known internationally. Yeah, and so I could see that they'd be kind of like the gateway.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, but then I mean the thing is, and sort of, you know, for international scholars, I mean the difficulty is always going to be the language. I mean,
yes.
You know, Icelandic. I'm sorry to say, it's a hard language.
How would you compare it in regards to learning to English? Because English is, as a second language, apparently quite difficult to learn.
I think grammatically, Icelandic is more complex. Icelandic is quite similar to German in terms of sort of the way the grammar is set up. So, yeah, sort of a similar level of difficulty to German.
I see. Yeah. So yeah, the language barrier probably would be tricky. In your other field, like, what's the most fulfilling thing you've done working with the Iceland Symphony?
Well, one of the most fulfilling, I would say, was sort of preparing and arranging for the move into Harpa in 2011. Which was, you know, it was huge, and we had, you know, a month-long festival of all kinds of fantastic events. And sort of, you know, I mean, working on the large-scale projects that we do every once in a while. Like next spring, we'll be doing the first Icelandic performance of Richard Wagner's Die Walküre, which has never been done here. And obviously, it's a huge project that we're doing in collaboration with the Icelandic Opera and the Reykjavik Arts Festival.
Oh, wow.
And sort of putting together these really massive projects and seeing them become reality is wonderful. Also, I would say commissioning new Icelandic works, being sort of the facilitator of new music being commissioned by Anna Thorvaldsdóttir or Daniel Bjarnason, that have then gone on to have great international careers, being played by the Berlin Philharmonic or the New York Philharmonic, and sort of having sown the seeds for those kinds of things is wonderful.
I was going to say, it's so fascinating. The more you speak, the more it's so interesting that you look backwards to look forwards. It's really cool to see how those two dovetail.
Yeah.
Like, what would you tell someone who's kind of either like your younger self or someone in a similar position to you where you're like, oh, I've studied all this music history, or oh, I really want to be an artistic director, like what would you tell someone? What would you advise them? What would you even tell your younger self, like, by the way, in about 10 years?
Right. That's a hard question. Well, I mean, I think there are several things that go into, I don't know, being a successful artistic administrator. I mean, you need to have a big control of the repertoire. I mean, I guess one of the things that I've been fortunate with is that I've just gone to a lot of concerts ever since I was a kid. You know, my parents used to take me to concerts, etc. And you know, studied a lot of music and music history and listened to a lot of music. I'm just sort of, you know, you need to have a passion for that, and then eventually, you know, you'll just know the repertoire, which is important because you need to be able to have these discussions with conductors or soloists or musicians about, you know, what's out there.
Yes.
And you need to be able to sort of negotiate and sort of, you know, keep your ground in a way and sort of know what you want, not just accept ideas, or you want to
otherwise
solicit ideas from
swayed.
them. But you want to have your firm ground to stand on. So that's important. But also, I mean, obviously, because so much of this also is just a question of interpersonal relationships and, you know, keeping a dialogue, keeping an open mind, being able to sort of maintain a sort of civil, courteous dialogue going. That sort of interpersonal skills are also very important. And I don't think you can stress that enough actually in the job that I do, because I mean, musicians are fantastic people, but I mean, they tend to have you know, I mean, they have egos. They're soloists. Yes. They're in music because they need to express themselves, but that also it leads to a cultivation of a certain kind of personality.
I was going to say that when you have that many people expressing themselves.
Right, exactly. So these are people that are incredibly expressive. They have really strong ideas and convictions about what they do and why they're doing it. And they also have sometimes big tempers and, you know, need to be dealt with in a delicate way.
I see.
And that, I think that was a big learning curve for me, sort of going into this job, as I'm sure it is for many people. But I think once you realize that and once you're sort of able to manage it, that contributes a lot to one's success in a job like this.
I was actually wondering when you were talking about that, if you'd encountered any kind of like adversity in either field, like any roadblocks in your academic or professional.
Not really. I know that sounds
You're
really
like,
strange.
nope, it's all been charmed and enchanted, everything's gone brilliantly.
Well, I mean, the roadblocks are just sort of, you know, the ones that come up, not that, you know, other people put something in your way, but I mean, just, you know, sometimes research can be difficult, or, you know, you're not finding the stuff that you wanted, or, you know, you're not inspired to write the kind of text that you wanted to write or whatever. So sometimes finding the inspiration for that can be a challenge.
Difficult, yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, also, I guess the difficulty also on the symphony orchestra side is the difficulty of being in a small, isolated environment like Iceland obviously is. You know, I can't just drive for half an hour and hear the New York Philharmonic when I want to.
Right.
And so one thing that's been crucial for me in both my careers is, like I said before, having this flexibility, both as an academic and as an administrator, to travel, to be in other places, experience other cultures, get the feel for the music scene in other places, because the only times that, you know, the great conductors and the soloists of the world, the musicians of the world, will come to Iceland is if I bring them here. But I don't know who they are until I decide to bring them here.
You have to go and find them.
Yeah. So I've actually been able to travel a lot and sort of maintain a presence in other places as well. And actually, I mean, this academic year, I'm actually not in Iceland very much at all.
Oh, wow.
I'm a visiting scholar at Yale University.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm mostly based in New Haven, and I'm attending concerts, obviously in New York and Boston frequently.
Oh, wow.
And, so those kinds of things, both in terms of my academic work and the work that I do for the symphony, are incredibly important because, I mean, as wonderful as Iceland is, it's a small place that's far away from many other places, you know what I mean?
Yes, I think that it has this like rarefied air about it because of that.
Yeah.
I think that that's what draws people to it, but also you are isolated.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that has led to this amazing development of the Icelandic music scene is that, we've done our own thing in a way. We sort of have an identity, our specific way of doing things.
Yes.
But we're also able to bring in influences from outside, cultivate relationships to the outside world to a certain extent. And I think the combination of these two things is what has made musical life in Iceland so successful. Yeah,
it kind of strikes me, like even thinking about being at Airwaves itself.
Yeah.
Like that there's a really wonderful dovetailing between, I feel like I've used the word dovetailing like 17 times, but it keeps coming to my brain, of kind of like the international music scene with the Icelandic music scene.
Yes.
And also it seems like there's a lot of crossover between the classical music scene and then the mainstream music scene. Mm-hmm. Like it seems like there's not as much differentiation, whereas in other cities there really is kind of a divide.
Yeah. Well, I think that's partly just because of the size and the nature of sort of the community in Iceland. Mm-hmm. That, it's a small enough community that, I mean, among musicians, we all know each other.
Right.
We all went to school with each other or with each other's siblings or studied with each other's parents or whatever. We all played chamber music together in high school or what, and so there are no barriers when it comes to different genres of music because we're all friends and we all hung out together when we were 10.
Exactly.
And so we all have each other's numbers and the pop artists can call their classical violinist friends and vice versa.
Exactly.
And that creates a really interesting kind of melting pot.
Do you ever find that you kind of have to, I guess in like American parlance, there we go, it's like code switching where it's like you're in one world and then you're in the other and you might use like different kind of social mores or language. Do you find that you have to do that when you are going internationally to different places, or that you find yourself interacting differently with musicians, say, at Yale than here?
In a way, probably a lot of it is subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to put your finger on what exactly that is. But I think maybe just every culture has its own sort of codes or signs or ways of expressing things or talking about things. And the fact that I studied in the States means that I'm completely used to
you're fluent
kind of expression as well. So I probably make the switch without ever really noticing it. But now that you've mentioned it, I'm gonna pay attention to it next time I'm in that kind of situation.
Yeah, I was curious how that would manifest because you're interacting with people.
I mean, it's maybe partly a question of vocabulary, partly a question of just expression, behavior. I don't know, and it's. I guess partly, I mean, Icelanders can be fairly reserved, I would say. It needs more to sort of, I don't know, get out the really passionate side, but it's there. It just needs to be teased out a little bit more carefully. Whereas American musicians will be sort of more blunt.
We're like the Labradors or Golden Retrievers.
Yeah, maybe.
We're just gonna run right up to you.
Right, but I mean, it's wonderful. It's great, but it's just a different way of functioning. I mean, these are very subtle things. I mean, they're not too obvious, but I guess you can put your finger on them, I guess.
Because I would imagine between being in like the different worlds of academia and then at the symphony, but then on like both levels, then being in different cultures.
Yes.
I was like, gosh, that must get kind of confusing personally.
Right.
Well, is there anything, I guess in closing, is there anything that you'd want to tell people about either the upcoming season or about the books, because I can link to those in the description of the podcast.
Well, the book is called Jón Leifs and the Musical Invention of Iceland, and it's published by Indiana University Press. And it came out last week, so it's
congratulations,
fresh off the press. The Iceland Symphony is, well, we're touring Germany and Austria next week. We're touring the UK in February. We have a new CD coming out with an American label called Sonoluminous in later this month, called Concurrence, which has new Icelandic music played by Icelandic soloists and conducted by an Icelandic conductor. It's going to be a great CD, so people should look out for that. And yes, if people are ever in Iceland, the Symphony Orchestra plays concerts usually on Thursday evenings in Harpa, which is Reykjavik's concert hall, from September through May. Welcome.
I was going to say, that sounds perfect. And then they get a summer vacation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks very much.
On Why Not Both. This has been awesome.
Thank you.